You know, man, we don't get together without realizing that there's a long history before us, you know? It started way before when any of us were born. In U.S. culture, there's an actually distinct history that might be different from the culture around the world. So depending on where you are, it might be different, but our U.S. culture has changed how we view men. I actually think the whole concept of our view of men has changed in the last 110 years dramatically in our country. It actually began right around the turn of the century here in America. What was happening before that is a father would raise his kids all the time because they were either farmers or they were tradesmen, and the shop would be in the house, or they were always just training their kids. And so sons grew up with their dads. Then an industrial revolution hit in America where suddenly men would no longer do their work as a trade or in a farm, but they would actually go off to factories or office complex or whatever it would be. And when they would do that, they would begin this process of pulling away. They would actually get up before the sun came up, come home after the sun went down, give the very best part of their days to something else other than their kids. And so their sons would grow up with this sort of almost physical disconnect with their dads. Certainly, they didn't have this kind of understanding of who they were and anything being handed to them from their dads. So they sort of found out who they were, guys would, by being told by their moms and by the society around them. About 45 years later, a war hit around the world that would end about 45 years later, called the Second World War. In that Second World War, what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation, a group of men went off from America and around the world and fought against a movement in the world that seemed like it was bent on destruction. And when we sent our men in there, they saw and experienced things that men experience in war that caused them to shut down. So now remember, at 1945, all of our men come home from the war, and emotionally, they are not expressing anything now. So now not only do they go back to their jobs and are gone physically, they're also disconnected emotionally. So sons are no longer hearing from their dads emotionally about how to relate. And so this whole area of emotion starts to get lost for us as guys. And about the early mid-70s, another movement hit in the United States. It was extremely important. We had the civil rights movement, which was so important for us to say that all people, race and creeds are created equal. But then there was this other movement that took place where we had to say, wait a minute, we're not treating women as equal to men, and men and women are equal. And so the women's movement hit, and when it hit, it was so necessary for us to say they are equal. But the problem was it didn't stay there. It also started to say that men and women are the same, and we're not. How do you know that? Well, simply ask a woman how she's doing. When you ask a guy how he's doing, he can answer it in a grunt. He doesn't even have to use words. It's the way we are. You ask a woman how she's doing, she'll tell you in sentences, paragraphs. We're not the same. So now all this confusion is added in. So we all suddenly, a group of guys that are saying, I'm just scared to death to talk about who I am and share our emotions. I have an uncle who my kids call the Great Uncle Hobbit, because he's short, he walks with a cane, and he was in the Second World War, and he was a half-track driver. And I remember one time talking with him. He describes a moment in the Battle of the Bulge where he is driving this half-track on ice. Firing is being taken, weapons are being fired in every direction, men are dropping everywhere, and he decides that the only thing he can do to save the guys in his half-track is to drive. And as he drives, guys are being shot in front of him and maybe even being hit by his half-track. Some are not just the enemy combatants, but some are his own guys. And he remembers running over bodies, not knowing whether he's running over living or dead, wounded or not, his men or somebody else, in an attempt to get his men out of that battle. This man's a very gentle man now in his 80s. But I'll never forget when he told us that. He told us with great tears and great emotion and great embarrassment and great horror. You know what that is, don't you? It's a man expressing his emotion and then pulling back in so that nobody hears it again. Because we aren't good at this. And we have 110 years of not being good at this as a nation where men just have stopped sharing emotions. Whenever I notice the difference between who we are, I think of the difference in how Lynn and I reacted to our sons being injured. Our oldest son had a head trauma injury that almost took his life. And he's fine now, he's doing great, but at that moment, Lynn wanted to do everything she could to connect again, even though he's married, even though he's not at home, and to take care of him. But he was married, and his wife wanted to come in, and boy, is that hard, because she just emotionally wanted to support her son in the trauma. When our son Caleb at the time was 18, and we found out he had brain cancer, same emotion. Now I'm on high kind of duty where I'm taking care of the family and during these times, but she is trying to be a mother to a son who's 19 years old, who had a girlfriend who he really cared about, who she was there by his side during the whole surgery and everything else. And during that particular time period, and Lynn just wanted to enter in. You know what's going on there, right? She wants desperately to express her emotional side. It's natural for women, and we have therefore decided as men it's not natural for us. So it would take me so long for me to express my emotion about what my boys were going through. I would stuff it and hide it. And then suddenly it would burst out when I wasn't expecting it. How did we get this way as guys? Well, I think some of the history I just told you is part of it. And part of it's the way we are semi-wired, but really it's a belief that we have about ourselves that if we ever really thought about it, it's different than how we see ourselves. It's actually different than how we perceive ourselves, but it's not different from how we are. Just about everything about an athletic event for a guy is rooted in emotion. What happens is when you and I start to play sports, we are all kinds of relationships are being built. You know, there's a relationship among the team. There's the emotion of the moment, all the juices that are flowing through your glands, all of the trash talking that's going back and forth inside the scrum. And so whether it's rugby or whether it's football or whether it's soccer or baseball or whatever it would be that you're playing, whatever you're doing, emotion is in the center of it. And yet as guys who we talk about sports so often, it seems like this is an area of our lives that we sort of ignore. That what goes on in this is so much of a relationship, so much of you expressing what's inside yourself. And that if I were to tell you that when it comes to a sporting event, it's really about feelings, so much more than feelings. And what we do with that what's going on physically is also going on in part of who you and I are from our brain that is saying, you know what, you're an emotional creature. Let's walk through a little bit about that, whether it be in sports or whether it be in any area of our lives as we grab this. Take your books, open up to our 10th trail as we look at this. How feelings, when ignored, keep us spandex males. When we do not deal with our emotions. Now, underline the word feelings, because feelings is the key word here. We don't like to think in terms of the fact that we are guys with feelings. We like to think of ourselves as jocks. We like to think of ourselves as warriors. We like to think of ourselves as sometimes lazy bums, but not feeling guys. Because we're just not good at expressing it. We just feel like we can't do it. And yet, it's part of our being. And it's going on all the time inside of us. So consider these couple things. Number one, there's a personal fear that spandex males have of feelings. That cause us to avoid reflective times. We just go. We just veg. But what we don't do is stop and think. We don't want to get to that part of our brain that is feeling. We don't want to get there. Now, this is part of, when we look at our core, you're still at the body. We're still considering the brain, the part of the brain that feels. And there's two halves of our spheres of our brain. One thinks, one feels. And what we do is we get through this kind of a concept where we go, let's ignore that one side. So I'll just stay busy. I'll just do a bunch of stuff. Spandex males don't want to reflect. They don't want to understand who and what they are. Look at B. As a result, they are afraid to change or truly have new discoveries. You know what it is? It's interesting. But we like to say, I'm just this guy who I can't express what I'm feeling, and I can't express the possibility of being creative anymore. There's so many things we just settle into. We just settle for. And Spandex males love to do this. And we kind of lose the perspective of who we are and what we are as guys. We really do, honestly. We start selling ourselves short. This side of us, when ignored, even though it's going on, even though all the firings are taking place inside your brain, when you ignore them, you're denying who you are, and your core will get really stilted as a result of it. Look at C. We strive for more control and are less open to utilizing our passion. What happens is when we are spandex males, we spend so much time in our life wanting desperately to control our environment. Everything about the history I just went through is about us controlling ourselves. But yet, when you get on a sporting event, I don't want a guy who sort of thinks through which way he's going to go. I want him both to react instinctively and emotionally. And I want him to say, I'll throw it all out to go for this moment. I want that. That's what we want from our athletes. That's what we want to be as athletes. It's what we want to have, but we tend to want to be able to control our passions. We want to be able to somehow or another just have this so that we're not exploding out. And we deny the very voice inside of us that's calling us up to be the man we're supposed to be. We deny the one that's specifically calling us to be a very, very significant man, to make a significant difference as a knight. Spandex males, man, we are struggling in this area. We don't want to go there. And so when we struggle with controlling and not using our passions, we also have this problem. We end up bored. We do. We end up as a bunch of guys that are bored, one, from not listening to our inner voice. Let me tell you what you're denying. You're denying dreams. You're denying passion inside of you that you go, oh, I can do this. You're denying longing for things. You settle when you don't listen to that voice. That voice is really connected to your soul. And it's going to speak into your brain. That feels is going to get in touch with that part of your soul that's calling you up to more. And we keep settling. And you know what? To deny this area of your life is to deny really being all that you're designed to be as a guy. Look at 2. Neglecting our leadership role. Leaders are guys that are going to feel. You have to feel. You know, it's interesting that in order for a leader to lead his troops well, he has to love them. But he also has to know, if he's a general in an army, that he also has to know that he might have to sacrifice the very thing he loves. You understand the conflict that brings? Leadership requires that you get in touch with this part of you that feels, and Spandex males don't like to go there. Look at the last one. Refusing to grow by sweat equity. One of the things that we really miss is we just miss the opportunity to do what it's going to take to get us there, because it's going to require us pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zones. And that's going to require us to work through all the emotion that we feel, all the things that scare us, all right? So, Spandex males, the guys we don't want to be, right? We want to be this man in the core. Remember the core. The core has the body. It's what we're talking about, the brain that feels, right? And on top of the body, we also have our soul, we have our spirit, we have our mind, we have the shadow, and we have our self that makes the decisions. And we have all this together. And what we have to do is acknowledge this part of our being and begin to develop it. Start to take advantage of all the feelings that we have. Look at this. Sports and the emotional brain. Understand that, as I mentioned to you about the whole thing of sports and what goes on when you and I play around, there are things that go on emotionally with us because of the way things are firing inside of our brain. And when those things go off, when we feel them, when we work on those, we will allow us to get to the height of our potential. Actually, to be honest with you, the greater athletes don't just control their emotion, they have emotion. They may know when to express it, but they have to have it. That's what your brain is wired to do. That's the way the whole system physically is working within you. Okay, so look at this. A, athletes are going to use words, I've always mentioned to you, like gut, instinct, and intuition. You know, we're going to be a way for us as guys just to say, okay, my gut says, my intuition, you know, this is all part of it. Those are very emotional words. Look what else athletes do. Athletes trash talk in order to affect the flow of passions in a game. We're going to spend time as our athletes. We're going to talk down our opponent, get his emotions up, talk up. You ever watch, guys, remember those times in the locker room when you're all getting psyched up together? And you're getting ready for the big thing, and you know all the emotion, and some guys just sit all within themselves. Some guys bang into each other. For me, it was always a weird deal. For me, I never started on anything, you know. So I'd be on a team, and I'd be going, "Hey, let's go, guys!" But I never had to get emotionally up for the game. In fact, it would always be the emotion when the guy would call me in. You know, I'm one of those kind of guys that if you're playing a sport that requires you to play outside on a field, and it rained the whole night before that event, and the water field is covered with water, the coach is going to send me in as a sub. Never mind. Okay, and what happens at that particular point is I go into this thing, I'm not prepared emotionally because I didn't think I was going to play. You got to watch guys that know they're going to play. Boy, there's emotional stuff going on. There's calling each other up. There's doing all this. Look at the other part. They establish a special bond with their teammates as a result of struggling together as a team. You know what I've watched my sons, their relationship with their friends that they build in sports are the tightest relationships of all their things. They've done life together. It's interesting. They don't always talk about life. They talk about often some surface things, but what happens is they start to spend so much time together and start to get to know each other that there's this bond, this deep bond. And so when Josh had his head trauma injury, actually it was with one of two of his guys that he wrestled with at Penn State. When he had his head trauma injury, they were right there. One of them was a doctor, fortunately, but they stood by. And when we were in the hospital for those days after the trauma injury, it was athlete after athlete after athlete after athlete after athlete, coach after coach after coach that walked in. I remember when Josh ruptured the disc in his back his senior year and did not go to nationals and go on to the Olympics where some of his goals and dreams were. I remember a coach coming to his house after that had happened. He had just wrestled his final match. He had pinned the guy, and he gone home, and he's just emotionally just shot. It's over. I mean, all of his dreams, everything's gone. Who shows up at his house, a coach, and says, "Dude, one of the greatest honors of my life has been coaching you and watching you be all that you are and all that you become." And it's interesting that bond is what guys have. And I'll tell you, I even now get emotion when I tell that story. I remember that coach walking in and saying, "Dude, you haven't hit your goal, but on every level you are designed to be proud of what you accomplished." Those are stuff that, guys, where does that come from? It comes from the emotional bond. You feel those in other areas too. You feel them in military services, some companies, certainly in some families. These are where we're all kind of bonded together. Okay, now let's look at this. Roman numeral 3. When the knight learns to understand and develop his emotional brain, he will do what's follow. When we develop this area of our lives, here's what we do. A, we'll listen more deeply to those around us. Now, deep listening actually involves not just these two ears, but actually the third ear within you that allows you to hear deep within the soul of what a person's saying. You know what's really cool? Sometimes as a guy, you and I, we just sort of listen. And then we get all done listening, we go, "What did you just say?" You know, I do that with my partners a lot. You know, they'll all be talking away and they'll have great ideas about what we should say and do in Knights of the 21st Century. And I'm thinking about something else and I just don't really listen to them completely. And you know what's really interesting is most of the time I haven't missed much. They're just goof-offs. But sometimes I've missed something that's powerful because I just didn't listen. Actually, they're really gracious and these are amazing men and very gifted. But you know what? Sometimes I don't listen. Sometimes I don't listen to Lynn. Sometimes I don't listen to my sons. I don't hear what they're really saying. When Caleb ripped his ACL for the second time, and I had to drive him everywhere because of the ACL replacement, we spent hours discovering each other again. He found out things about me. I found out things about him. My youngest son and I went on a trip together, and on that trip, we just spent time just discovering each other. I took him to every place where I was when I grew up so he could see it. And he could feel my life, and I got to understand his life. Actually, my youngest son is more in touch with his emotions than anybody else. He's just an amazing guy at this. And what we've learned to do is we've learned to listen. Listen, not just with two ears, but with that third ear within us. B, find greater daily motivation for task achievement. Underline that word, a motivation, because it's what's going to help you push through. Everything about emotion is what pushes you through. It's not just my will to get there. That will to get there is your emotion. Guys, if you're going to lead, you're going to have to be in touch with the emotional side that is either going to want you to back off or you have to call it up to push you in. But dealing with all the things that go with that motivate us. Look at C. Place greater value in his relational connections. Underline that word relational. In fact, you can underline this whole idea of connections because what we have to do is this. You and I get these distant feelings sometimes from people. We feel like we're not connected, and that's usually because we're emotionally distant. When you that are playing on the edge right now of an affair, you're just on that edge because your wife isn't caring for you and somebody else is responding, and you're looking at her and you feel like she's more attractive than your wife. You feel like she cares more than your wife. You know what you're doing, right? You're disconnecting one relational emotion and replacing it with another. It'd be like this. You that are parents, do you ever go to the beach and there's tons of kids on the beach? Tons of them. And you're only noticing one. It's yours because they're the ones you have to take care of. When you and I don't get in touch with our emotions, we stop watching our kids, right? I mean, can you imagine doing that? That's what you're doing with your marriage right now. You've disconnected with your wife, and so you're connecting somewhere else. You have emotions. You have these longings that pull on your instincts, that desire for pleasure, but it's also emotionally connected, especially you guys that are on the edge of not a one-night stand, but an affair. You've been sharing too much, saying too much, doing too much. Another thing a knight needs to deal with is understand women and children better. There's so many things I got to say here. Do you know that the essence of a man's strength, that a woman is longing to see? You guys that are sitting right now and you're listening to this and you're in prison, hear this and don't miss this one. What they're longing to see, both women and children, is not how strong you bulk up in the weight room. The strength they're longing for is tenderness. Tenderness is a man bringing his strength under control. And when you do that, it's never cruel. It's controlled. All the emotion best expressed in tenderness. Years and years ago, there was a commercial where Mean Joe Green is walking off the field, apparently in a loss in a football game, and a little kid says, "Hey, do you want my Coke?" Mean Joe Green drinks it, Coke or Pepsi, what it is, drinks it down, drinks the whole bottle. The kid's sitting there, and then Joe says, "Thanks, kid," and walks away, and then turns and chucks his jersey to the kid and said, "Here, kid, keep it." All of a sudden, Mean Joe Green isn't Mean Joe anymore. There's this tender side, right? You know what gets to me? One of the things that gets to me is when I watch guys cut down women or their children. I just want to talk to you guys for a minute that you've learned that that's a quick way to get a laugh at the office. It's a quick way to get a laugh when you go out to dinner. It's a quick way to get a laugh at a family gathering. Stop it. Stop it. Every time you cut down somebody you value, it lands. Now, that's different than guys. We joke with each other all the time. We are forever just having this banter. But even there, you have to be careful. Because when we do it, sometimes with guys, it gets to them. But I will tell you, with your kids, with your wife, with women, with children, it lands. It lands. They hear it. We were surprised by having our first two sons were sort of planned. The second two sons were sort of surprise kids. For years, I called them Whoops and Oops instead of Caleb and Seth. And Lynn said, "Don't do that. It's dangerous, you know." And so I remember sitting down with the guys and saying, "Hey, I'm really sorry. I've been doing this for a while." And they were okay with it. But what was concerning me was that was like disconnecting with them emotionally to make them feel like they weren't desired as much as the others were. Guys, be very careful about this cutting each other down. In fact, you want to get my emotion to rise? Have dinner with me sometime. My wife, your wife, you and me, and you cut her down. Boy, you'll see my emotion. You actually will hear it. I won't do it in front of her, but you and I will talk. It's really weird when a guy asks another guy, "Hey, you want to go to the bathroom together?" You know why? Because I want to tell you something, man. Stop this area, all right? Women and children, longing for tenderness. It's where our greatest strength is. Look at E. Set up personal boundaries with others he considers difficult. What you and I need to do is we need to set boundaries, guys. When somebody's getting to you emotionally, put a boundary on it. It's okay. Boundaries are saying, I'm going to control this relationship. You know, one of the things that's really interesting is that many of us are using phones today where you can check who's calling and you can decide whether you're emotionally ready to handle that. So be careful about setting up so many boundaries that you stop building relationships, but be wise. Knights know where to put their boundaries. Here's my boundary. I don't ever talk to a woman alone apart from Lynn. Don't ever do it. That's one of my boundaries. All right? Now, that doesn't mean that sometimes I'm on a phone call with a business partner, somebody or something like that, but I have been very, very careful and guarded because you know why? Those alone moments actually set me up for some pretty tricky things. So I've set boundaries up. I have boundaries up with certain people that emotionally drain me. Guys that you try to avoid. Do you ever have those guys? Set some boundaries, all right? That's what knights do. F, take responsibility for his emotional reactions. When you react, when you explode, when you haven't been dealing with your emotions, you know what most times when we get angry, it's been an emotion building up inside of us and it blams out. And when we do that, guys, just so you know, when that emotional outbreak takes place, we do damage. Anger's not a problem until it's anger that is exploding, not righteous anger, not good anger. It's the kind of anger that is built up, and so be very, very careful. When you do it, ask for forgiveness. When you do it, correct the wrong. It's an important thing. It gets back to tenderness, right? What are people longing for? It will always make an impression when you blow it and you correct it, far more than if you just blew it, right? All right. G, understand that being open or closed to his emotional experience is an all or nothing process for a guy. Understand that if you're not open to it, you're not open to it. If you are, you are. Understand that emotions can come at any given time. And you can go huge emotional swings, right? I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities. So understand what's going on emotionally. Understand that this is going to be happening, and that you just don't turn it on and off. You either ignore it or you'll deal with it. But if you do not deal with it, it's going to come out, right? Your brain is still churning out those emotional responses, right? Understand this part of you. Actually, start to enjoy this part of you. One of the things I love laughing with guys. But I've also learned to love to cry with guys. I've loved it when a guy got so personal with a struggle in his life that I know he was sharing something to me that if I didn't handle this right, he would be in trouble. And when you get that moment, man, there's all kinds of emotion. But don't miss those opportunities to build these kind of deep relationships one with another. It is what makes that fight on the field that we have when we play sports so personal when we sit side by side talking in a restaurant somewhere. Look at the next one. H. Get over his need for exactness, perfection, scientific proof, and his overemphasis on rationality. This allows him to see life more realistically. One of the things that my dad was a perfectionist. Guys, get over it. You're not perfect. You're going to make mistakes. And so emotions go with that. So let's deal with that side of it. All right, let's look at some other things. Keep in mind that the world of emotions, there are no ways to hide what you feel. Somebody's going to figure it out. The more you know somebody, the easier it is to spot it. But you know what? Even if you don't know somebody very well, I can just look at a person sitting on a train and I can tell you sort of their emotional state, unless they're sleeping, and even then. So you can start to notice what's going on. So it's not, you don't hide. People know. You think nobody knows. But you go ahead and ask somebody that's close to you how you're feeling on any given day you think you've hidden. They'll nail you. All right? We know. Look at B. Exact timelines which control feelings. There are no exact timelines, so they can at any time explode up, right? When my dad died, you know the story, right? And when my dad died, it wasn't emotionally hard on me. I mean, it really wasn't. I actually enjoyed his last 4 days. I actually feel very comfortable with where he is in the presence of God because of his connection through Christ. So I didn't have that, and yet about 2 weeks later, all of a sudden I found myself crying. It might have been a culmination of all the things that had happened over 18 months. I don't know, but I just found myself crying. I had no idea why. But it'll just pop up. All right? It's okay. It's okay. And sometimes you can control when they happen, and sometimes you can't. There's no timelines to this. 24/7. In the world of emotions, there are no rules of logic. So it is possible to love someone deeply at one time and hate them at another. If you have a middle schooler, you know what I'm talking about, right? You have a kid that's in 7th grade. One time they love you, the next time they don't. What's the closest thing to that? When you hit midlife crisis as a guy. When you're about 40, 45 years of age, you do the same thing. Instead of buying a red sports car, one minute you're angry, and the next minute you're feeling all kinds of emotions. That's the emotional swing that's within us. So know that it's possible to go from high-low real quick, almost unexplainably. It's part of who we are. It's okay. Don't panic. In this world of emotions, there are no methods to understand yourself truly and honestly without looking at your various feelings. You know what? Do you want to understand you? Try to understand your wife. Try to understand a woman. Because if you can't understand her, you probably aren't understanding you. So learn to work in those areas. I love the fact that in the Bible it says, love your wife in an understanding way. It's extremely important. All right. Keep in mind that in a world of emotions, there are no solutions gained or found by running away from feeling messages. You can't run away from yourself, right? You can't. If a snake is here, I can run away from it. But I can't run away from me. Wherever I go, it goes. It's part of my core, right? It's not my armor. It's not my chainmail. This is my core. So you can't run away from your emotions. You're going to have to deal with it. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. All right. F. In the world of emotions, there are no simple tools to fix the feelings of loss. You must have the courage to feel your grief, especially when dealing with a personal loss. You know what? Give yourself permission to feel grief. As a man, to be honest with you, when you deal with it, it actually makes you look tender anyway, which is what the world's longing from you. But give yourself permission to deal with grief. It might take a few days, a few weeks. And I don't mean just grief in the loss of a life. Sometimes you have to grieve the loss of a job. Grieve the loss of your youthfulness. Talk to a guy who's on a pacemaker and has MS. His pacemaker is due to re-up. And he asked me, you know what if I don't re-up it because I feel like I'm useless? He's dealing with this. And I said to him, hey, dude, just so you know, there's nothing about you that's useless. He couldn't do what he used to be able to do, but his grief for what he can't do is legitimate. But don't let it cause you not to feel like you're valuable. Guys, I don't know what state you're in. Your worth is fully established. And the fact that you're alive means that there's lives to touch and people to make a difference with. It's one of the great joys of being a knight, all right? Why don't you consider a guy in the Bible named Barak? What happens in this man's life is he was called to lead. As a matter of fact, this woman named Deborah, who was a judge of the nation of Israel, was a leader and called him up and said, hey, you do this great thing. You run this great battle. Barak was so in touch with his emotional side that he could not slide into his leadership side. And he said, I will only do this if you go with me. He went back into, I need a woman to take care of me kind of thing. And so he loses the victory. The credit goes to another woman, not even Deborah, a woman by the name of Jael. Barak missed it because he couldn't handle his emotions. Guys, when you ignore the fact you have emotions, it doesn't mean that you don't have them, right? So all of a sudden, you'll do things that will cause you to miss knighthood because you haven't dealt with this area of your life. So he was actually so in touch with his emotional side that he did emotional things without even knowing about it. And when you read that story in the book of Judges in the Bible, it's in your nightly news there. It's a sad story. Let me give you a couple points you can learn from it. When a leader allows his emotions to get out of control, he is not confident to lead. He's not confident enough to lead. He just doesn't have it. There's not enough of it. B, he's unable to trust himself or others. This is Barak's problem. He has no confidence to lead. He doesn't trust himself. Guys, you got to deal with this side of your emotion. When it's out of control, that's what's going to happen. C, he will not successfully achieve his manhood tasks. You know, that's important. We have manhood goals. You know, one of my night goals for this year, and remember, we do life maps, you know, of what we're going to do, and in these life maps, we're going to ask you to do a knighthood plan when you to graduate. One of mine this year is by actually a certain date in this year, get in touch with what I can do that is soul refreshing for me. I am so busy caring for others, valuing Lynn, my kids, relationships, businesses, and everything else I do. I get so busy doing things that I just don't sit down and do what I do for me. And I actually can't name what would soul refresh me. One of my goals is to find that out. You know why? Because it's part of leadership. I'm going to deny what I'm supposed to be as a knight if I don't learn to take care of me as part of the core. That's how emotions work. All right. Finally, the knight learns to use his feelings by, and these are some things that just really will help a lot. A, recognizing his emotional voice. Recognize when that emotion is happening. You have to train yourself to do it. I mean, if I asked you to do it when you were playing sports, you could figure it out. If I asked you to do it, at a movie that made you feel something, something like Gladiator, where you just saw it and you went, yeah, I want to be that man, or whatever it is. I mean, so you can remember doing it. Now start to get connected. Work at it, all right? B, choosing the emotion that he will let prevail. See, you're all going to have emotion. Now you got to decide which one you let rule the moment. You know what? Anger is rising up. Decide how you're going to let it rule. What you're going to do with it. Where it's going to go. It'll go tremendously to help us understand this. C, constantly listening to his emotional channel. 6 parts of us in the core, but when we get to the body, there are many parts of the body turn into that channel on a regular basis. Just say, what am I feeling emotionally right now? What's that causing? How's that causing me to interact at this very moment? Do that in business. Do that when you're not going through a difficult situation, or do it when you are. Just check into that channel, see what's going on there, all right? D, not limiting your emotional repertoire. Don't limit it. Don't say, okay, I only have these 3. Start to be able to express other ones. I don't know where the expression came from that men don't cry, but you have tear ducts, guys. You have them. Maybe you need to explore that one a little bit. I don't mean that, please don't go to a chick flick and cry, because then it makes me really nervous and all that. But actually, to be honest with you, it's okay to do that. It really is. You know what? It's okay for you to feel and express emotion. It's also important that we know as knights how to use that and control that. All right? It's all part of the journey. E, sharing his emotional world with others, which is necessary for you to build relationships. You and I need to think in terms of, I need to be able to share some of that. So when you get together with the guys in your campfire, you start to share your emotion. Every once in a while you see something that says, man, that guy gets it. There's a scene in the movie Gettysburg that I really love. There's a head of a cavalry unit that's pulling into the city of Gettysburg before the Great Battle of Gettysburg, which, if you know anything about U.S. history, in U.S. history, there's a war called the Civil War between the South and the North. And as Colonel Buford pulls into Gettysburg with his troops, he talks to one of his commanders, and he describes what's about to happen in the next day or two. And he talks about the fact that if we don't get the high ground, we will lose this battle and maybe lose the war. And at one point, his eyes well up with tears. And he says, I can see this so clear, like it's already happened. And if we can't deny them the high ground, we will lose this war. And you hear all of this emotion, and he uses all of that emotion to make an incredibly brilliant military decision that did change the outcome of the war. And he and his group of cavalry soldiers will engage the enemy at a certain pass at the bottom of the city and hold the high ground. Took his emotion, used it, controlled it, and made all the difference. Don't be afraid of it, guys. Embrace it. It's who you are. It's part of your core. We'll be talking about more sides of this next time we get together. Thanks.